So congratulations, we have finished the 7th PowerPoint, the PowerPoint on the English Civil War between absolutism and constitutionalism, Catholics and Protestants under the Stuart dynasty. Now we're moving into the scientific revolution, okay? This is going to be the precursor to the revolutions that we see in period 3, like the American and French revolutions and the Haitian revolutions and the Latin American revolutions. Okay, so whereas we covered comparison as our historical thinking skill in the last slide, now we're going to be focusing on the historical thinking skill of continuity and change over time. Okay, because that's what a revolution is. It is a change in society, a change in government, okay, a change in belief systems. Okay, so the scientific revolution isn't just a one event during 1 year. It's a series of changes that happen over an extended period of time, 2 centuries, the 1500s to the 1700s. This is smack dab in the middle of period 2, because remember, period 2 is the 1450s to the 1750s. So this is a key event that you need to be familiar with. Well, what led up to the scientific revolution? If we're looking at context, okay, the Renaissance was occurring in the 1450s. Europe was leaving the Dark Ages. Everyone else had already had a golden age and had all these innovations, medical advances, mathematical knowledge, maritime technology, and Europe wanted to catch up. They wanted their own golden age. Okay, so you have the rebirth of the search for knowledge. Okay, you get the rebirth in the interest in Greco-Roman antiquity, technologies from other cultures, and thus you have the age of exploration, which is, again, searching for more knowledge and more things. So Europe is entering into its series of golden ages due to the Renaissance taking them out of the Dark Ages. During this time period, we also have a big challenge to the church. Now, what does this have to do with science? Well, remember that people went to the church during the Middle Ages for answers, like when the bubonic plague hit. They believed that sickness was a result of sin, so they go to the church to get help. And the church can't cure the bubonic plague. So that's going to be a hit to the authority and the influence of the church. Okay, they go to the church for answers, and the church doesn't have those answers. Or the church becomes corrupt, like what we see with the Protestant Reformation with Martin Luther. So the influence of the church is going to start decreasing in period 2 due to the Renaissance and Reformation and the bubonic plague and other crises of the Middle Ages. And so people turn away from the church for answers. We move out of the age of religion into the age of reason. Now remember, before Martin Luther, if anyone criticized the church or what the church believed, that was heresy. And you could be excommunicated or executed for saying, hey, the church is wrong. So if the church says that the earth is the center of the universe, and you're like, actually, I've done some studying and it turns out the sun is the center, they could kill you. Okay, but they don't have that power post-Reformation, because noble princes and lords and just regular people have been breaking off from the Catholic Church to follow the Protestant religion. Okay, so that means that more people are going to start challenging the ideas of the church and how the world works, thus leading to the scientific revolution. And of course, we have the technology and innovations that have come to Europe from other cultures through cultural diffusion, the exchanging of goods and ideas. Okay, because remember, all these other mighty empires had already had their golden age. Europe was behind. So Europe is trying to catch up. And they believe during this new age that they can conquer the world, not just literally in terms of goods, but also in terms of figuring out how the world works. Does that make sense so far? Now, early on in the scientific revolution, the church still has power, and so they are going to imprison or put on house arrest people for challenging their ideas. Like Galileo is going to challenge the geocentric model of the universe, and he's going to be imprisoned for heresy. Okay, they don't execute him, but they do imprison him. But that's the start of the move away from theology to reason. Ology means study of. Theo refers to religion. So the study of religion in theology, as the power of the church and the influence of the church decreases, we see a change over time towards science and reason, the age of reason. So the church believed in the geocentric model of the universe. This was the idea that people are the center of the universe. We are God's best creation. The Roman Catholic Church accepted the geocentric theory, saying that humans were the center of the universe, everything revolves around us, and we're the only planet. Everything that we see in the sky are just heavenly bodies of light, and that's it. No other planets, no other creations. Okay? Now, Galileo criticized that, and then later, Nicholas Copernicus is going to publicly criticize that by publishing the book On the Revolutions of the Heavenly Spheres. So how the planets move and where we are in that movement. So the church theory of the geocentric model said we are the center. Everything revolves around us, including the sun. The heliocentric model is going to be the one that Copernicus proves in his book. We're actually not the center of the universe. The sun, hence helio, is the center, and we revolve around the sun. Okay, the church is going to have a big problem with this because it counters centuries of their theory for the geocentric model. But remember, their influence has decreased, and there's no stopping the spread of this information due to the printing press. Okay, so we come to accept the heliocentric model. Francis Bacon is another scientist in the Age of Reason who builds up the process of empiricism. Empiricism is just the scientific method. You come up with an argument, with a hypothesis, and then you test that hypothesis. You collect data and see if your hypothesis fails or succeeds. An example of an hypothesis is an if-then statement. So if I said, if I drop my pencil, then the pencil will fall to the floor. Now, if I test that 100 times, what is the data going to tell me? How many times is that pencil going to fall to the floor when I drop it? 100 times, exactly right. It's going to drop every single time. Since I cannot prove my hypothesis false, that means I have a theory. Now, people often confuse theory with the colloquial use of it, like, oh, you believe that? That's just a theory. Okay? A theory isn't just a guess. A theory isn't just an opinion. It's considered scientific fact because no one has been able to disprove it yet. Okay? They've replicated experiments and done it over and over and over again, and every time they get the same results. Gravity is a theory. You wouldn't just say, oh, well, that's just a theory. I'm going to walk around and live my life as if I'm floating. That wouldn't work, okay? Because every time we test that theory, it is impossible to prove it false in our atmosphere, okay, so far. Maybe in the future, things will change. Okay, so the use of the scientific method to come up with arguments or a thesis for one of the natural laws and then testing it over and over again, replicating it over and over again until you have a theory. Speaking of gravity, Sir Isaac Newton is a key scientist in the scientific revolution. He publishes the book Principia, which goes and explains the theory of gravity. He combines Galileo's laws of motion and Kepler's laws of planetary motion, which, according to the geocentric theory, we revolve in perfect circles. But in actuality, our revolutions are more oval shaped than they are circular. So he uses that to do a bunch of math to figure out gravity, the theory of gravity. It's not just a theory, it is considered a scientific fact because the hypothesis, the argument, has been tested over and over and over again, yielding the same results. So this is going to lead people to believe, hey, if we can figure out science and natural laws, we don't need faith or miracles to explain the world. Okay, if the Bible explains the earth as having a sphere around it and pillars under the ground and the sun revolves around us, well, instead of relying on the Pope and what the Bible says for scientific fact, okay, we rely on science and reason for scientific fact and use the Bible and the Pope for our religious guidance rather than a literal interpretation. Okay, so now we see the decrease in the influence of religion and an increase in the use of reason and the scientific method. Now, does this mean that religion disappears and everyone becomes an atheist? Absolutely not. Okay, faith and reason combined together in scholasticism. Okay, so it's not like, oh, they disproved the existence of miracles or faith or God. Okay, even the philosophers don't become full-blown atheists. It's just instead of defining everything through religion, they start defining natural laws based on data that they can collect. Now, under this theory, these laws that we figure out about gravity and other natural laws applied to nature show that the world is ordered and rational. It's subject to certain rules. And we can apply that not just to nature, but we can also apply that to society and government. Let's figure out what are the laws of society since the world is ordered and rational. And if we figure out the rules, then we can figure out a better society. Okay, so one of the key changes over time that we see as a result of the scientific method and the Renaissance and the Reformation is the decreased power of the Catholic Church. It doesn't go away completely, okay? But as the power of the church decreases, okay, science and reason and all of this information spreads further throughout Europe and then even beyond Europe. Are we good so far? All right. Then on to the age of the Enlightenment or the age of reason. The Enlightenment came out of the scientific revolution. Y'all may remember that the scientific revolution was from the 1500s to the 1700s. The Enlightenment is from the 1700s to the 1800s. This is the time period that moves us out of period 2 and into period 3 in our curriculum, okay? So people believe that the world is ordered and rational. All you have to do is figure out the rules. So science, reason, and natural laws can help us figure out the world. And once we figure out the world, then we have become enlightened. Okay, hence it being called the Enlightenment. And those people who are enlightened or trying to become enlightened are philosophers. The philosophers of the Enlightenment are philosophers during this time period. The most significant of whom is John Locke. So we move away from theology and government. And how do we see theology and government? Well, in absolutism, you have divine right of kings. And under absolutism, the church and the state work together to maintain the status quo. Now we're moving away from using religion to define government to using natural law to define government. And John Locke comes up with his theories on those natural laws. According to the social contract by Rousseau, we enter into an agreement with the government. We get something out of that agreement. That something is protection, the protection of our natural rights, life, liberty, and property. But we also have to protect ourselves from the government. So the people need to control the government in order to make sure that their natural rights are preserved. And if the government oversteps or becomes too powerful, then the people have the right to rebel, which goes against the divine right theory, and it goes against absolutism. Okay, so this is going to expand beyond Europe and start a ton of revolutions, both in the old world and in the new world. Now remember, we don't get rid of religion during this time period. It's still very Christian in Europe. Scholasticism is the combination of reason and faith. So rather than having them work against each other, combine them together to define the world. Okay, but for the most part, the focus is going to be on the use of reason to figure out the rules of the universe so we can then figure out the universe. Okay, there are going to be some new branches of a type of faith like deism. Thomas Jefferson was a deist. They believe in the watchmaker analogy where God exists, but he just made the world, made us, set up the rules, and then left. And he's off doing God stuff. Kind of like if you built a clock, you don't have to stare at it to make sure that it ticks and to make sure that the second hand moves and the minute hand moves and the hour hand moves. You set up gears and rules, and once you plug it up or put the battery in it, it works on its own. So you can go off and do other stuff like grocery shop. You don't have to observe the clock at all times to make sure it's working. Okay, so they believed that God existed, but he wasn't all up in our business. He didn't care about sins or sinners or anything like that. He built the earth, built humans, and gave us natural laws. And then we need to figure out those natural laws in order to get through life. Okay, that's not atheism, but it's also not really Christianity either. So these philosophers are going to try to apply this reasoning to their government and to their society. So how do we make a better society and a better government? Well, they learn from the mistakes of the past century. Y'all may remember that they had 100 years worth of religious wars in Europe. The 30 Years' War, the Smalcalden Wars, the War of the Three Henrys, the English Civil War. You have all these religious wars between Christians, Protestants versus Catholics versus Calvinists, Huguenots, Puritans, what have you. So they say, hey, maybe we shouldn't do that anymore. How about the best society is a society that has religious toleration? Let people live. Let people worship however they want to worship. Let's stop fighting over religion. Okay, so even though they move against faith as the definition for their worldview, it doesn't mean that they try to eliminate faith out of existence in Europe. They promote religious toleration and separation of church and state. They also are pro-representative government. Again, letting the people have a voice in government to protect their natural rights. And in line with the idea of tabula rasa, if you want people to be good and to have people who are competent, then you need to educate them. You need to expand knowledge. You need to write good stuff, good information on their tabula rasa, on their blank slate. So this is going to challenge absolutism. It's going to challenge divine right theory. It's going to challenge the church. Okay, and it's going to lead to significant change over time with various revolutions as people implement these ideas of natural rights and natural laws to their own governments and societies. Are we good so far? All right. This is a video that I've posted in Schoology for you. It's only about 8 minutes long, and it leads us into period 3. The period of revolutions in 1750 to the 1900s. And it's a very good review of the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment. Okay, so during asynchronous time or for homework, you can do this today, tomorrow, Thursday, Friday, before the test, okay, next Thursday. You need to watch this short 8-minute video reviewing what we've discussed and going into a little bit more detail about those natural rights and its major effects on moving from period 2 into period 3. Does anyone have any questions, comments, concerns? So we finished talking about the scientific revolution and how that led to the Enlightenment. And remember, the scientific revolution and Enlightenment tried to apply natural laws, not just to science, but also to society and government. Well, if you can apply it to the society and to government, social and political, there are going to be some people who want to apply natural laws to the economy. So this is where we're going to see a change over time. A change over time from mercantilism to capitalism. Okay, mercantilism was the main economic theory in old imperialism. And remember, that's period 2, 1450 to 1750. Okay, with the beginnings of the Columbian Exchange, the Europeans began colonizing the Americas. Okay, now why did they colonize the Americas instead of Africa or Asia?
Africa had malaria, and they also had the same weapons that Europe had.
Exactly right. You have malaria in Africa, which the Europeans were not immune to. And the mighty African empires had the same military technology like gunpowder and metal weapons. Okay, the Americas did not have gun weapons or metal weapons, and they also lacked an immunity to old world diseases. Okay, so under mercantilism, the Europeans established colonies in the New World, and the purpose of the colonies is to enrich the mother country. First, Spain and Portugal, and then other Europeans are going to start getting involved. Now, as we move out of period 2 and into period 3, which is from 1750 to 1900, we see even more changes over time. Y'all remember that we talked a lot about revolutions, okay? The Enlightenment is going to spur revolutions in the New World. The ideals of life, liberty, and property are going to lead to the colonies no longer wanting to serve the mother country's purposes. And so they revolt and form their own independent nations. So now Europe doesn't have colonies in the New World to supply their market. So they're going to move to a new form of imperialism, new imperialism in period 3. And this begins with the Industrial Revolution. Now, the Industrial Revolution begins in Britain. And Britain starts building factories for the manufacturing of goods. Now, they used to get their raw materials, like cotton, from the New World in the Columbian Exchange. But now the New World is independent and it has its own countries like the United States and Mexico and Brazil. So they're no longer sending those raw materials to Europe. Well, in the Columbian Exchange, quinine was discovered. And quinine is used to treat the symptoms of malaria. Okay, so that means that whereas the Portuguese had initially set up port cities along the coast of Africa in order to get to the spice trade and to engage in the Asiento African slave trade, now they're going to be able to move into Africa without malaria holding them back. Also, the Industrial Revolution is going to result in new technology, including new guns like the Maxim gun, which y'all may be more familiar with as the machine gun. Okay, so rifles versus machine gun, the machine gun's going to have an advantage. Also, new transportation like the steamboat, where they no longer have to rely on human labor or wind power to move their boats. And so that's going to enable the Europeans to move into the interior of Africa to colonize it. Okay, this is called the Scramble for Africa. Remember that the Europeans are concerned about the balance of power. They want power and they're competing with other European countries for that power. So a bunch of European countries are going to start moving into Africa and carving out pieces of it for themselves. But they're not just going to focus on Africa, they're also going to focus on Asia, with the British focusing very heavily on South Asia, India. And they're going to focus on India primarily for the raw materials of cotton. That cotton is going to be sent back to Britain, where their factories are going to make it into clothing, which they then sell for a profit under capitalism. So now, instead of raw materials coming from the New World to the mother countries, now the mother countries have established new colonies in the Old World that supplies them with the raw materials for their industrial revolution. Okay, so we see a lot of changes from period 2 into period 3. Make sure that you keep note of the difference between old imperialism, which is the New World, and new imperialism, which is the Old World. Does that make sense so far? Now, one of the key economic theories that the Industrial Revolution is going to rely on is capitalism, and that's going to be created by Adam Smith. Okay, so we're going to compare and contrast these two economic theories. Okay, in old imperialism, mercantilism, 1600s, you want more exports than imports. Remember that exporting is selling, importing is buying. So you're importing raw materials from your colonies in the New World. Those raw materials include metals like gold and silver that has been mined by the Native Americans under the encomienda. Eventually, they're going to branch out into cash crops as forms of raw materials like tobacco and cotton. Now, even though the people in the colonies are the ones manufacturing all of this wealth, growing these crops and mining this bullion, do the natives or the people living in the New World get any of the profit from that work? No, because remember, under mercantilism, the colonies exist to benefit the mother country. So that bullion goes to Spain, the cash crops go to Spain or to England, okay, or to France, like if it's the fur trade. So even if there's a viceroy, okay, a Spanish official working in Spain or working in the New World on behalf of Spain, and let's say he grows a lot of tobacco and the French want to buy it from him for a profit, can he sell it to the French? No, he can't make money off of those goods. Those goods belong to the mother country. So the government of the mother country very tightly controls the economy and interferes with the markets. They tell you what to grow, what to make, and where to send it. And capital is the material wealth that they make from that colonization. And they use that wealth to make more wealth. Okay, so using money to make more money. One of the ways that they do this is by lending money, but in paying back that money, you're charged interest. So if I loaned $100 to somebody, but I charged a really high interest rate, like 25%, then that means they would have to give me back the original 100 plus $25, meaning that I've made a profit of $25. Student loans work the same way, although they have lower interest rates than 25%, where you borrow money to pay for college, and then you pay back the original amount you borrowed plus interest that has accrued over the years. Same thing with credit cards. You buy something using money borrowed from the bank, and then you have to pay back that money plus interest. Okay. Now, the key point in mercantilism that you need to be familiar with is that the government controls the economy and wealth is based on bullion. Gold and silver is wealth, and the government controls it. Under laissez-faire capitalism, you're going to see a change over time where wealth is based in land rather than gold and silver, because gold and silver can go through inflation. And there's no control of the economy by the government. You let the market regulate itself. Okay, now I know that this is a word that's hard to pronounce and hard to spell, but you do need to learn it. The reason being that I'm not the only history teacher who's going to make you learn this. You're gonna have to talk about it in AP US history. Y'all, mercantilism is a key factor in the American Revolution. The English colonists were told, hey, you need to sell this only to Britain. Britain canceled salutary neglect and tried to force the colonists to follow mercantilism, and that's going to tick the colonists off. They want laissez-faire capitalism. You're going to learn about it in AP European history, and even more detail than what we are covering in this class, because European history gets much more specific. It's not a broad view of history. And then again, in AP Economics, 12th grade, you best believe you're going to be talking about mercantilism and laissez-faire under Adam Smith, because these are the roots of capitalism that emerges later in Keynesian economics in the United States. Okay, so go ahead and save your notes for the next 3 years, because you are going to need to know these topics. This slide is going to come back over and over again, or at least the material on it. So what changed with laissez-faire capitalism? Well, physiocrats like Adam Smith said that gold and silver can't be the basis for wealth because of inflation. Land has to be the source of all wealth. So how I remember this is I think, okay, physical, land is physical wealth. And they also believed that natural laws in the economy meant that the government should not interfere in the economy. Adam Smith, the father of capitalism, wrote in his book, Wealth of Nations, that we need free trade, no government interference. So how do we know what prices should be, or what should be bought, or what should be sold? Well, the invisible hand of the market, known as supply and demand, determines that for us. It's not the government setting prices or telling factories what to make. It's the consumer, the economy, supply and demand determining what is bought and sold. Okay, if there's a high demand but low supply, then that good is going to be very expensive. If there's a low demand but high supply, then that good is going to be very, very cheap. Okay, so for instance, the PS5, okay, very difficult to get. People want it, but there's not enough PS5s in circulation for the price to go down. Even now, bots on the internet are buying up PS5s as soon as they're on the market so they can sell them for a higher price, because there's a low supply of PS5 devices, but there's a there's a low supply, but there's a high demand for that console. Versus the Wii U. There's a high supply of Wii U consoles, not as big of a demand for the Wii as opposed to the PS5. Y'all may remember in the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic, about a year ago, there was a high demand for hand sanitizer and masks and cleaning supplies. And the stores ran out of those supplies very, very quickly. And so when you went on Amazon or online to try to find those supplies, there were people selling those goods for very, very high prices because there's a high demand and a limited supply. Nowadays, if I want to go get hand sanitizer or a mask, okay, some people are giving out masks for free. Like if you walk into a Walmart, they'll hand you a mask, or I can just go to the Dollar Tree and get what I need, okay? Because prices have lowered because the supply increased, okay? That is the invisible hand that regulates the market. Now, in our version of capitalism, we try to restrict monopolies. Like when people started going around buying up all the supplies of hand sanitizer so they could sell them for a profit on the internet, the government got involved and arrested them and made them give away those stockpiles, okay? Because they said that that was a threat to public health. So it's not, this is unfettered capitalism right here, laissez-faire. Okay, in modern times, there's been more of an effort to restrain unlimited capitalism. because of the negative effects it can have on consumers. So like we bust up monopolies. We try to prevent monopolies from being formed or trusts being formed, okay? So that people don't get squandered out of their money, okay? But laissez-faire is unfettered, meaning there are no restrictions on it. So if a factory worker wants to sell his goods for a very, very high price, he can do that as long as there's a demand for that good. If he wants to pay his laborers a penny a day, then he can do that because there's a high supply of labor, okay, and not enough jobs available. Okay, so the Industrial Revolution under laissez-faire capitalism is going to be very good for people with money because they're going to increase the amount of money they have, but it's going to be very, very bad for the working class. They're going to be in incredibly dangerous working conditions in the factories because there's no government regulation saying, hey, you have to give them goggles or you have to make sure that the saw doesn't take off their fingers, okay? So people are going to lose life and limb in the Industrial Revolution due to unfettered laissez-faire capitalism, okay? But remember, Adam Smith was trying to apply Enlightenment ideals, natural laws, to the economy, saying the natural laws are supply and demand, and the market regulates itself. If there's too much of a good on the market, then the price will drop. If there's not enough of a good on the market, then the price will increase and more people will try to create that good to meet supply and demand. And that's where we get the name laissez-faire. Laissez-faire is French for let do or let it be. So leave the economy alone, government, and let it regulate itself. And that gives us the free market economy. Does that make sense so far? Excellent. So now let's do a review of the effects of old imperialism in the New World on the economy. Okay, the commercial revolution and the price revolution. Now, the commercial revolution is going to be mostly positive for the Europeans. The price revolution is going to be mostly negative for the Europeans, except the middle class. They're actually going to rise in status. Okay, so the commercial revolution is the first time in world history when the entire world is connected. After 1492, we know about the New World. The Columbian Exchange starts. The old world and the new world are exchanging goods together. So you shift away from small scale local trade and bartering to large scale bulk trade around the world. And under mercantilism, that focus is going to be on gold and silver. So this commercial revolution is going to impact the entire world. It's going to impact the New World negatively. It's going to impact the Europeans positively. So what led to the commercial revolution? Well, the Europeans established colonies overseas that they could exploit for material wealth. New ocean trade routes developed, like the Atlantic Ocean trade route with the Columbian Exchange and the route around Africa that Vasco da Gama discovered to get to the spice trade. So that means the world is connected economically. In addition to wealth coming from the New World and the Columbian Exchange, you also have food goods coming from the New World, like the potato, which is going to cause a population rise in Europe, or cassava, which is going to lead to population growth in Africa. But one of the negatives that occurs from the commercial revolution is inflation. That is the price revolution. According to supply and demand, if you have a high supply of something, that decreases its material value. Well, Spain and Portugal is getting flooded with gold and silver from their colonies in the New World. Because of all of that gold and silver flooding into the market, the more of that money is in circulation, the less that money is worth, because gold and silver is no longer scarce. It's no longer rare. That's going to lead to inflation or the rise in prices. So goods are going to cost more gold and silver. Okay? That inflation is going to hurt Europe. This is the reason why we can't just print more money to get out of debt. Okay? Because if you put more money into circulation, that money becomes worth less and less as you put in more and more. And this has actually happened before in world history. After World War I, the Weimar Republic of Germany was in a lot of debt due to the war. And so they started printing off lots of German marks, which is like the German dollar. Well, as they kept printing more and more paper money, that paper money became worthless. It led to hyperinflation, extreme inflation. Y'all, there are some pictures in the interwar years between World War I and World War II where there are children playing with stacks on stacks of money because it's worthless. They're given to children as toys to use as bricks to build forts. There are people wallpapering their house with German marks because they're worthless. There are people setting them on fire to keep themselves warm because they're worthless. And you'll see people going to the market with wheelbarrows full of cash just to buy a loaf of bread, because that's how bad the inflation was after World War I in Germany. Okay, so printing more money is not an answer to solving debt. Someone in the chat said, how did money become so complicated even though it's a human-made concept? Well, human-made concepts are extremely complicated. Like, I don't understand Bitcoin or Dogecoin. I don't understand any of that. I'm not smart enough. I hear it's doing well. It's like $43,000 per Bitcoin. But basically, we give money its value. Even paper money is only worth what we believe it's worth. Okay, because there's gold and silver or other wealth backing up that money, okay, or bonds or stocks. Like if there were a zombie apocalypse right now, would money have any value? No. Water and food, preserved food would have weapons. Those would have a lot more value than money, okay? Money is a human construct and we determine its wealth or its value. So the price revolution is going to increase inflation in the New World. And that's where we see this cycle begin. European exploration brought in new stuff, including money. Some of that new stuff, like food, led to an increase in population. As a result of the larger population, we have larger empires. Europeans want to continue building those empires, so they try to build on their wealth and their power. Well, more power requires more money. If you're going to build up your military, that takes money. If you're going to build extravagant infrastructure like palaces or bridges, then that costs money. So this is going to be a continuing cycle, not just in old imperialism, but also in new imperialism. Now, early on in old imperialism, governments were sponsoring exploration because governments and monarchs had the money, not just regular old people. Well, what if you were a noble or a middle-class person who wanted to invest in the Columbian Exchange? Well, it might be way too risky. What if you have like $10,000 of your life savings and you put it all on a trip to the New World, and then as it's coming back with all of this wealth, it sinks in a storm? Well, then you've lost literally everything. It's huge risk for huge reward. So how do you lower the risk? Well, instead of investing all of your money as a single person in sponsoring an expedition, you can get a group of people to pool their money together, maybe $1,000 each from 10 people. Then that way, if the ship makes it back safely, you can all split the profits. And if it doesn't come back safely, then all you've lost is $1,000 instead of everything you own. Okay, this concept is known as joint stock companies. The Dutch, the English, the French, they're going to be building these in the New World as well as in India, okay, in order to spread the risk across a larger group to ensure some profit is made. Now, if your ship comes back, you don't get 100% of the profit because you're not the one paying for 100% of the costs. You only get your share of that stock. Okay, so the early stock market comes from this concept. Are we good so far? Excellent. Then we have covered the scientific revolution with the decline of the power of the church and an increase on empiricism. That scientific revolution is going to lead to people trying to apply natural laws outside of nature, applying it to society and government and the economy. That's going to give us the Enlightenment, which leads to a number of revolutions and independence movements, which cuts off the New World colonies from being controlled by the Europeans as they declare independence. And as a result, the Europeans are going to move from the New World for colonizing to the Old World, mainly Africa and South Asia, for colonization during the Industrial Revolution. We have officially finished with our lecture unit.